So I want to talk this morning about cultivating positive emotions, but for the next few sessions, we're going to be talking about that topic and just managing desire because it's an important part of our path. But emotions are sort of the baseline for talking about desire, at least a significant portion. And I don't need to tell you that we're emotional creatures, and unchecked, we're often controlled by our emotions. But one of the other benefits of the Dharma is that it offers strategies for managing our emotions skillfully so that we're not just blindly controlled by them or blindsided by them, which is often the case if we're not actively addressing them. And as you know, they can range from pleasant to unpleasant and everything in between, often neutral, but there's a whole continuum of emotions. But this morning, I want to focus primarily on positive emotions and the joy that they can bring to our lives. We've been talking about cultivating joy, so I wanted to follow up with that a little bit. And I don't need to tell you that as human beings, we're capable of great passion, very strong emotions. But often they take the form of strong desires, positive desires such as love, awe, beauty, intimacy, feelings of spaciousness. I mean, all of those can fall under the general heading of emotions. And there are many in the philosophy world that believe that our passions and emotions are what make us uniquely human. You know, our ability not just to have these emotions, but to have some sort of cognitive correlate to them, which helps us understand them, label them, and so forth. I mean, my dogs have emotions, but they don't label them. They just experience them in the moment, and then they pass. But our passions and emotions can also become, and often do become, unskillful. They cause harm and suffering to ourselves and to others. And most of the world's faith traditions have taught us to be wary of our passions, be wary of our emotions, lest they unleash harmful behavior. You know, that unchecked emotions can be a source of tremendous harm and unskillful behavior. But to me, the effort to restrain all of our emotions, to sort of repress them, is really throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, how about we learn to be more discerning about our emotions and manage them more skillfully? Traditional faith traditions teach that to lead to a spiritual life, often we must renounce all material possessions, curb all our passions, curb all our emotions, because our passions create craving, get us into trouble, get us to act unskillfully. The Buddha took a somewhat different tack here. As you recall, he began his journey after he left his father's palace by becoming an ascetic, attempting to deny all pleasures, all emotions, all desires. He lost weight. He wandered aimlessly into northern India, practically starved himself to death, trying to overcome even the inclination to eat. But he realized that doing all this didn't bring a reduction in his suffering, didn't bring more joy in his life. But neither had indulging every sensual desire in his father's palace. That had not brought a reduction in suffering. That had not brought more joy. So he brilliantly sought this middle way, one in which the desires and passions were allowed and to emerge, but they were tempered by discernment and wisdom. And therein lies the magic of his approach. He's allowing them, but tempering them with discernment and wisdom. You know, he recognized that our passions and desires are really what allow us, really bind us to our world and allow us to thrive. If we attempt to suppress them and deny them, not only is that likely to be unsuccessful, but the world becomes very bland, very uninteresting, you know, and we then end up looking for happiness in material things. You know, we want more stuff. We think that the next shiny thing is going to bring us happiness. So we direct our desires unskillfully into just stuff. But when we open our desires and passions skillfully, we that's the vehicle for discovering the beauty, the awe, the mystery in the world. And that's really my definition of spiritual, you know, directing our desires into the beauty, the mystery, and the awe of the world. We experience our passions and desires as the substance which make up our spiritual journey. How bland and dull it would be without these desires and passions, desire for beauty, desire for truth, desire for, experiencing the awe that the world offers us. And the other benefit of this is that as we do so, it loosens our focus on the ego. It reduces our need for approval, for aggrandizement, for being special that we talk about. We don't need to get our fix, if you will, emotionally from our ego needs. Instead, we begin to see as we walk this path how our ego and its selfishness and its unskillful intentions motivates us to act in ways that are unskillful and often harmful. And that path separates us from others. If I'm all caught up in my ego, me, my, mine, look how special I am, I'm really not that interested in you. I'm really not seeking genuine connection. I want connection only to the extent that you aggrandize me. You think, you tell me how wonderful I am, but that's not meaningful connection. That's ego-driven aggrandizement. But the problem again is not our passions and desires. It's when we indulge them selfishly and obsessively. That's when we get into trouble, which is why our ethical foundation is so important. Because a less ego-driven, skillful expression of our desires directs us towards wise action, one of the Eightfold Path we talked about recently, skillful choices. Alternately, obsessively seeking pleasure becomes addictive. We try to fill our emptiness, our sense of aloneness, with some sort of addictive, compulsive behavior, whatever it would be. Shopping, drugs, alcohol, sex, the list goes on and on. But those are self-absorbed, ego-driven pursuits, which only deepens our suffering. So that's why this whole thing of desire and managing our emotions becomes so important. We set an intention to work with our desires and passions as the gateway to deepening our spirituality. I mean, it's a paradox. I mean, our desires can go either way. They can go toward compulsive addictive behavior and self-absorption and ego, or they can go toward opening us to a more spiritual view of the world. A world, a view that connects us to others, connects us to the larger world, connects us to the natural world. But we have to try to remove too much of the me from our passions. We can't make it all about ourselves. So it's not about my pleasure, regardless of the harm or suffering that it causes. And too much in our culture, it becomes about my pleasure and the heck with the harm and suffering that it causes. Where, we have to see where passion and compassion become inseparable. Taking the me out of it. The more time we spend indulging the ego unskillfully, the more time we are denying the law of impermanence and the interconnection of all things. When I'm all caught up in myself, I'm not really thinking about, my mortality. I'm not thinking about the temporariness of things. But when I reflect on all the people and all the institutions and organizations that have helped me along the way, it takes the me out of it and it deepens my gratitude. Despite what we want to believe, none of us got where we are solely by ourselves, solely through our own efforts. I don't need to tell you that our world is filled with suffering because as a species, we've separated from the spiritual, as defined earlier a few minutes ago, from the material. We focus on the material to the detriment of the spiritual. And much suffering has resulted, including political oppression, racism, violence, displacement. The list goes on and on. And I think, in a somewhat misguided way, traditional faith traditions have told us to fight our passionate nature, not to enjoy life too much. As though that somehow repressing our desires is the ticket. But the Buddha knew better. He understood better. He understood that a middle way, a life of well-managed passions and desires, relatively free of the ego's demands, was the real secret to joy in our lives. These traditional teachings, and I've worked with people coming out of those traditions over the years, tend to make people unhappy. They promise another better world in the afterlife as compensation. But, in the meantime, just repress your desires and suffer accordingly, or have them break through. We used to talk about people who would repress desires and repress desires. It's like a tea kettle. Sooner or later, there's a breakthrough, and then they act out in harmful ways. And this has sadly separated us from the real source of happiness and enlightenment, which is in the present moment, as I described, managing our desires, relatively free of ego. That it comes simply from a spiritual path, a path of passion, well managed in the simple enjoyment of life, moment to moment, day to day, without too much ego driving the train. So let me stop there and let's get your thoughts about ego and managing emotion.